Hello and welcome to Roll Call Part 5. This video belongs to a series of limited videos looking at different archetypes, that is playstyles or classes or roles, that you can put your survivors in and utilise when playing Kingdom Death as a method of simplifying and streamlining your decisions both in crafting and in play. My name's Fen and today we're looking at archers. Archers are a bow-based class that is hybridised between damage dealing and support. So they will alternate between dealing damage to the monster with their bow and providing support abilities via items, including the bow-specific items, arrows, which is a big reason why archers exist as this kind of hybrid thing. It's not just, oh, I'm going to play an archer, therefore I have to play support abilities. It's by playing an archer, you probably want to take advantage of arrows, and as a consequence, you're going to be also providing support abilities, so why not lean into that further? Now, as a hybrid class, especially a hybrid damage class, archers are very skill intensive. There's a lot to develop and build. Not least because many bows are actually cumbersome, and even some arrows are, meaning you can't move anywhere when you're firing them. Now that's usually compensated by having range on your bow. But it's awkward at times. It is a slow, it is a almost artillery based play style. And there's a lot of things you can do to help the team, an awful lot you bring to the table, especially unique things that no other class can, but also you're constantly juggling between supporting and dishing out that damage. So let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages of this class as a whole. First of all, as mentioned, you're taking on the role of damage dealing and support. There's two separate videos that go into those in a lot of detail, so I'm not going to reiterate all of that here. But the key thing is damage dealing is one of those things that's very easy to do and incredibly hard to master. And you're making it even more complicated because you're also adding onto that the additional option of, should I be actually supporting my teammates for this turn? Should I be doing other things? And because of the cumbersome nature, you've even got the added issue that quite often you can't attack and move, so you're going to have to think about whether you're using dash or to provide extra movement. And if not, then what's the plan? Where are you lacing all of your different things in? What are the beats for the showdown? So that's, a pretty tricky thing, but we do have a lot of advantages. First of all, the progression path for bows is relatively straightforward. There's not a lot of bows in the game. There's a finite number of expansions that provide either bows or arrows or things that support bows and arrows. And we'll look at that when we get onto the items and so on, which means you have a very easy to follow progression. You can look and go, okay, I now have this bow, I want this arrow, I need it from this monster. That smooths things out and it reduces the headspace for the entire group, because picking monster targets to go after, you've got a shopping list in mind and it is very specific. Likewise with armor sets, you're not particularly drawn by a whole bunch of different armor sets. We're going to have a look at the ones that benefit archers the most. Primarily though, it's just very much, I want this. In the core game, you might even play the whole campaign just with one armor set. Speaking of, archers are also a class that does incredibly well naked. That is, not wearing any armor because maybe they're a ley line walker, or you just don't have any armor crafted for them to use, or you have crystalline skin, that kind of stuff. And that has extra synergy because it frees up a huge amount of your gear grid, like a huge portion of it gets opened up and freed. On top of that, you have range. Range is so powerful. Range is unbelievably powerful. Because with range, you've got, first of all, you're less likely to be targeted, especially if other spies are nearer, but secondly, if you are targeted, the further you start away from the monster, the better chance you have of your dashes getting you out of reach and cancelling the monster's attack. So even if you do get targeted, quite often you can get clear of the situation and leave the monster stranded because your dash has cancelled its entire attack. Super, super good. And last of all, arrows. Arrows are one of the few ways that you can apply debuffs to monsters. So within context of most games, buffs are positives, like, for example, the Lucky Charm buffs your luck by 1. And debuffs are the opposite, they're negatives. Debuffs applied to the monster are really powerful because that scales for every single survivor. For example, as we'll look at a bit later, the Clawhead Arrow gives the monster -1 evasion. -1 evasion on the monster is effectively +1 accuracy for all survivors, up to the natural cap of hitting on a 2+. That's huge. So not only do buffs and debuffs, debuffs on monsters have such a big impact in weakening the monster, they also scale incredibly well if you have more survivors, because either you're playing with 5 or 6 players, or perhaps you're playing with the scout. So you provide an awful lot of value that nobody else can manage. On the downsides, well, your progression path is kind of limited. You don't have a lot of options. While this means you can concentrate more on really becoming a master of using the bow and when to fire it, when to not, what modes to use the bow in, when to fire arrow, etc., etc., it also means if you're the kind of person who craves variety, maybe you should look at playing a melee class. So this is not for everyone. I'm not particularly into playing the archer playstyle, but my partner is. So learned a lot about it. My partner is the person who sort of pioneers the play styles and takes the fundamentals and expands on them and knows all the tactical nuance. I'm better at the strategy, but when it comes to the nuance, on the board, what position to be in, that's who I would trust with those choices. So, yeah. Secondly, while a list is a positive, your armor options are very limited, and you don't tend to have the best armor. That means when things go wrong, you need to get the heck out of there as quickly as possible, because first of all, you are standing by yourself quite often at a further distance than anyone else, and that means if the monster comes towards you, you're almost always cut off from everyone else. The monster will be between you and your fellow survivors. So you really have to get good at understanding your escape routes, where you're going to go, and so on and so forth. So that's a bit of a concern. As I mentioned in the damage dealing video, don't get isolated, but by playing bows, you're automatically and naturally isolated from the very, very start. The other really big negative of archers, again, relates to the positive of crystalline skin, which I talked about. Slot pressure. We only have 9 gear slots and 3 fighting arts and maybe 3 knowledges if we're playing with arc survivors, but we only have 9 gear slots and 3 fighting arts to get our build sorted out, and we can't usually rely on the fighting arts to be particularly predictable when we're getting them. So really a lot lands in gear, and the bow, if you're using arrows, that's more gear slots taken up, a lot more. Now, turns out there are a couple of ways you can squeeze more value out of those gear slots, and we'll talk about them here in this video, but you're going to feel that pressure. You're going to feel, I've got this arrow in my gear grid and I'm firing it once in the showdown and that's it. Then after that it's not doing anything, or if you're lucky, maybe it's providing some affinities. It gets even worse because arrows are not guaranteed hits. They do not automatically succeed at doing what you need them to do. So that's kind of in a nutshell. You're playing long range, you are playing very safely, but that means as well that when things go wrong, you're on your own. And also when things go wrong, you quite often turn out to be one of the last people standing, meaning that you need to be clutch. You're going to have situations where you gotta get it done because everyone else is too worn out, and you're the only one, say, with armor points left, or maybe the only one left alive. So that's a bunch of things to think about. Now let us go and get to looking at the cards. All right, well, let's start with the bow proficiency, shall we? Because this is the core of what you're going to be doing. Add specialization, you get this ability, which is when attacking with a bow, you may reroll any misses once. That's fantastic because, for the most part, you're not going to have the advantage of being able to get into the blind spot, either because you're playing quite at long range, or you can't move around and get into the blind spot anyway. There are exceptions, we'll get to those. But the big thing here is having this reroll helps a great deal, like an awful lot, and that's very useful. But it's limit once per attack. However, you can very easily be more accurate than you appear just straight on paper by looking at the bow, if that makes sense. The mastery, though, oh boy, this is one of the really, really good masteries. If you're a bowmaster, all bows in your gear grid gain deadly 2, and in addition you get to ignore cumbersome on all bows. Once you can ignore cumbersome, you're playing in more of a skirmisher style, like as if you were fighting with a short bow. You're moving around the place, putting in your shots. It's huge. And one of these goals you should definitely have is to try and get to a bowmaster and then have family, so you can pass on half of that bow proficiency to the babs and get those leveled up and spend more time with this mastery available. So, anything that helps you progress up faster, fantastic, because this is a game changer. Also, anything that lets you go out while retired is very good as well. So, keep an eye out for that. But this is no joke. This is absolutely incredible. Deadly 2 is a huge number. And remember, that can be enhanced further with other luck benefits and bonuses like a lucky charm. So this is a very, very strong mastery and a solid but not overpowered specialization. Now let's get to the gear. So we're actually going to start by looking at our weapons here, and our very first one in the deck is, if we view it here, actually not a bow, it's bone darts. Bone darts is generally where you start out, this because it costs 1 bone, and is available in the easiest access weapon crafting location. And also, this is kind of no slouch, even though it is 1 bone. Sure, it's only got 1 speed, but that's not slow, so you potentially can have more speed on it. Of course, Frenzy isn't going to work, because Frenzy doesn't work with ranged weapons. Well, the speed portion doesn't work, which is actually really useful in fighting the Butcher. Something worth noting, archers have a little bit of extra strength against the Butcher than other kinds of classes, so always worth bearing that in mind. But anyway, bone darts, it's where you start. Very solid weapon, just not super exciting, but it's important to note that this thing doesn't have cumbersome, so even when you have your first bow, you probably want to keep the bone darts in your gear grid, because it's another option that you can use if you're unable to shoot and there's no reason to do any support actions, because maybe you don't have any support gear yet because you're still early in the game. So that's how journey starts. Next up, let's get to the first of our helpful expansion monsters. I say expansion, but our helpful monsters, that's the White Lion. If you have the White Lion, you have access to the Catgut Bow. This is everyone's first bow, pretty much. Very solid, very good weapon. You notice it's cumbersome. This affinity is actually quite good, because as you can just see out of focus here, you can put the Rawhide headband above it, and you don't need any more of the rest of Rawhide. You'd like it, but in the early game where maybe you're trying to be as efficient with your hide as possible and give it to closer range survivors, you can just say, I'll have a headband, I'll wear a loincloth, a cloth, and that's good enough for me. And you'll still have this active, which is really nice. And as always in the early game, having blue affinities is very useful, especially if you plan to play a luck-based bow build style, although the catgut bow is better at strength than luck. This aim ability is also really good. You drop the speed down to 1 and you now hit on a 5+, that's fantastic. So this is very much the core game starting package here for weapons. A bone darts, a catgut bow, and then you'll get a clawhead arrow, which we'll talk about in a moment. Solid weapon. However, the other option if you play with the Flower Knight is to wait a little while and get the Vespertine bow. Or maybe even you still craft one of these, but you have the intention of flipping to the Vespertine bow. In earlier editions, the Vespertine bow was kind of, for some players, just the only bow they ever got because it was way too good. It got nicely nerfed, and now it's about equivalent to the catgut bow, but it's faster, and it's your deadly rather than your strength based. So these are your two starting playstyles. You can choose which one you want to go with. The other big advantages of the Vespertine bow, on top of it being deadly, is it also has this alternate fire method, but actually locks you in at being slow, which range increase though, huge, really big range. So it kind of works as a sniper bow if you want to use it that way. That's a quote Matt from Twist Gaming, the old sniper bow. This affinity, nice, will connect with a lucky charm. Very solid, doesn't have cumbersome, so you can play at closer range, you can take advantage of the blind spot. You'll probably want more armor if you're playing that way, but this used to be ridiculously overpowered. It's now got a nice place in the meta. Speaking of the close range style of playing, Sunshark bow is another option. This is something I actually recommend for tanks as well, but if we wanted to play with it as just as an archer, this is an option for us to play at really short range, range 1 here, but there are ways of boosting it, and it effectively has 5.5 average strength is the way to think about it. Sharp, is essentially the average of a 1d10, which is 5.5 because it starts at 1 and ends at 10 as opposed to 0 to 10. But it's still, this is a really, really good bow, and it's a different playstyle. Just might not be the one for you, but if you are playing the close range style of play, which is more damage orientated, Sunspot Darts is another great option for you to have on your gear grid as a support ability because it provides tons of survival. Even if you're not next to the monster and you're at a longer distance, this is still a lot of survival for the people who are next to them. So this is something to consider if you are wanting to provide survival regeneration for everyone as a part of the support side of your build. Back to the classics, we've got one of our 2 endgame bows. This one is the Phoenix. The arc bow is the classic long range steady shot longbow. Very high strength, slow, can get extra range if you lock all of these in, which isn't too hard to do as it's got very nicely positioned affinities. You always like to see the left facing red because you can just do this nice and easily if you want to. Very, very good bow, and very, very much in the conversation. All of these bows here, these 3 in particular, are under conversation for the best end game bow depending on playstyle. The other one is another Sunstalker weapon, like the Sunshark bow and Sunspot Dart. It's the Inkblood bow. It has less, let's just make sure the arc bow's here. It has less strength than the arc bow slightly, but as you gain more bleeding tokens, it gets additional strength. So there's a self-bleed sub-theme you can run here if you have ways of bleeding yourself. It also has deadly built in naturally, so this makes, again, this concept of, do I play strength, do I play luck, do I play strength, or do I play luck? This one kind of does both. It loses cumbersome when in darkness. The thing about this, unlike the Ink Sword, which absolutely desperately needs to be in darkness, otherwise it does nothing, the Inkblood bow still works when you're not in darkness. It just has cumbersome, so you don't worry about that. at all, especially because if you get to become a bowmaster, you also ignore cumbersome anyway. So this bottom line here, it's a nice bonus. You don't really mind, don't care one way or another. Up here and here, you get 2 bonus affinities that the bow itself doesn't need, which is really nice. Really nice. And of course, this one connects to a lucky charm. So that's your bow options, and we can already see if we want to play archers, then we likely want at least one of the White Lion or the Flower Knight, and we want one of the Sunstalker or the Phoenix to give us our bow options. Otherwise, if they're not in the campaign, we're probably not performing archery. As a little bit of future proofing, there is a bow in the Crimson Crocodile suite, but you have to kill the level 2 to get it. I'll get into that whenever it makes it to the simulator, but that there are more options out there, and additional things are turning up as time passes. Now our other half of the bow specific, well, I should say third, because we've got to look at quivers, but yeah, our other next portion is the arrows. Arrows provide a bunch of different utility, but can essentially be broken into 2 different categories. Number 1 is pure damage, and the second one is support. So Clawhead Arrow, this is the first arrow most people will get. Great affinity, connects with Lucky Charm, Lucky Charm Rawhide, that's always nice to have, even if you're just doing strength. It has really, really good strength. Really good strength. This arrow will last for a long time, a lot longer than the catgut bow itself will manage. 50% accuracy though isn't the best. That's a pain in the butt, so sometimes this arrow might not do anything because you've missed, but if you do hit, -1 evasion token, nice bonus, everybody gets basically +1 accuracy, including you. That's great. So very powerful, solid weapon, and the fact that it has an affinity means it can still do something even if you do miss. Vespertine Arrow, this is a disposable arrow. The main important thing about it here is it's deadly 4 and 2 speed, but deadly 4, and that means you can manage to generate additional resources or line this up against the perfect shot, perfect location to get deadly 4 against. Deadly 4 is a big number, and remember, if you're playing with the Vespertine bow, you've probably got a lucky charm as well anyway, so this generally pays off. If you miss, you get this flower patch, because this always archives itself. So this is a disposable, impermanent, temporary thing, as is the theming of the Flower Knight. But it's really good if you have specific goals in mind for it. You don't bring this along to a fight just because. You bring this because you're like, I want to wound this particular hit location I've seen and critically wound it and get a benefit from that. But also, sometimes you just turn flowers into Vespertine arrows, flower resources into Vespertine arrows, because flower resources are temporary, and Vespertine arrows are a way of storing them. So either way, very strong, but different to the rest in that it's disposable. The White Giga Lion, our upgraded version of the White Lion, gives you the dense bone arrows. Dense bone arrows let you use whatever bow you fancy, because you can just fire the arrows. The downside of that is, of course, you're firing the arrows, not the bow, so proficiency, etc, etc. This isn't a bow, but it's strength 6 and sharp, so equivalent of 11.5 strength, or if you don't like hearing that, 0.5, then you can consider it to be 17 strength on average, a 17 wounding roll on average, because that's 11, which is the average of 2d10 plus the 6. Really strong, really good. Again, provides a couple of affinities that it doesn't need itself. Only negative is cumbersome. You might have an older version, because originally this was released without cumbersome, and it was stupidly good. It is still unbelievably powerful. Like, just having this plus a catgut bow puts you in a fantastic spot, but also it's great with the Vespertine bow as well, because suddenly you can fire luck-based shots when that's relevant, and you can switch to a very good high-strength-based attack for the rest of the showdown. Very powerful. Absolutely a must-craft, I think, unless you are graduating to a very good late-game bow. Gloom-Coated Arrow. This is kind of a setup item. essentially you hit, it's got a ton of speed, and it will let you put all of the hit locations back on top of the deck, and because you're choosing the order in which you're wounding, you can kind of set the deck up for everyone else. And remember, these are revealed, so you just keep them on top of the deck face up, if you know, derived information. So that's like, this is a, I don't use it as much, but it's got good strength. It comes from a nemesis monster, the Slenderman, and it is just a great setup item, and many other players, I've seen them get incredible use out of this. The reason I don't use it is because there's only so many things you can use, so I don't use it all the time. However, this next arrow I do use all the time. Hollow point arrow might be one of the most like busted things you can do in this game. It comes from the Phoenix, 11 strength, so absolutely the kind of strength that should be on a weapon that becomes this like late from a Phoenix. It's very cheap to craft as well. -1 movement token on hit trigger, not on wound, on hit. So, you know, pretty reliable, not cumbersome, so you can get in the blind spot to use this to increase the chances of hitting. -1 movement token may not sound like a lot, but movement is the most important stat in the entire game. If a monster can't reach you, most of the time it can't attack you. And -1 movement, that applies to everyone. You know, I've talked about how some survivors, you love having more movement on survivors. Well, you love having less movement on monsters even more. And as we're going to get to a bit further down the line, this is once per showdown for the arrow, but that -1 movement point is stackable with any other -1 movement points, including other hollow point arrows. So you can run multiple bows in a hunt party. I've done it before. I've had a bow tank and a bow damage dealer, an archer, and a bow tank using the Sunshark bow. And suddenly you start stripping the movement away from the monster. In fact, as we're going to briefly talk about when we get to quivers, there's the potential for you to reduce the monster's movement by 2 per survivor. I've had monsters capped at 1 movement. The showdown's over when that happens, unless it's a monster that has like unlimited movement, which a couple of them do. It's absolutely bonkers how hard monsters get broken by not being able to move. They get weighed down by all these hollow point arrows and become incredibly ineffective. Sunshark arrows, they're a weaker version of dense bone arrows, you can see, but they're more accurate. They have a limit to the number of times you can fire them, otherwise, and less speed, but otherwise they're kind of similar. I wish they had affinities. They don't, but you know, it is what it is. These used to be one of the most commonly picked arrows until dense bone arrows made them obsolete by power creep. But if you don't have the white lion, or specifically the white giga lion, you may pick this. Finally, Dragonbite Bolt, it's garbage. This stat profile is not good enough for something that comes from a Node 3 monster. It doesn't even have a particularly good ability. Devastating One's the most notable thing it has here going on. I fully expect this to be improved in the future. I almost just left it out of the video because it's so inconsequential and just kind of not really worth worrying about. The best thing is when you surge with this and knock back the monster to cancel an attack. That's like the best use of it and the only reason it made it into this video at all. Hopefully it gets an addressed, like maybe if they increase the accuracy and made this on hit rather than on wound, or they put its strength to match the hollow point arrow. I just think this needs a revision and an update in Campaigns of Death. Okay, onto our support items. Hit location control, these are the big 3 that you will be considering. Cat Eye Circlet, talked about this before, very good. You can even surge to set yourself up and then attack, just a great item. Wisdom Potion, you're pretty good to just passively have one of these and be the person who carries it, because many bows are kind of low on their speed, so you can take good advantage of that. Crest Crown, well, you're hunting phoenixes, this is another nice version. There's a bunch of hit location control items, the kind of things you should be considering. as part of your support suite as the archer. The other thing will be rawhide, which we'll talk about in the armor section. So let's get on to another one with a little bit more discussion, quivers. We have 2 quiver monsters in the first generation of expansions, the Dragon King with the shielded quiver, and the Sun Shark with the incredibly hard to remember quiver and sun string. So, shielded quiver provides slot compression by virtue of letting you fire your arrows an additional time. So this means one more clawhead arrow, that could be -2 evasion, or as I talked about before, with the hollow point arrow, an additional activation of the hollow point arrow for a total of -2 movement potentially. If you ran 4 archers with 4 shielded quivers and 4 hollow point arrows, that's the thing I was talking about before. I've tried it out. It's fun as an experiment. It kind of just bypasses a lot of what the game's trying to do, so it loses, once the novelty wears off, it's kind of just reduces the showdowns down to being a bit sort of boring, but it's very strong, and having a shielded quiver on one archer with a hollow point arrow, that feels like a good middle ground, and fairly reasonable. The quiver and sunstring, on the other hand, this one gives us some affinities, that's nice. It lets us carry up to 3 arrow gear cards outside of our grid. They must be different, or all arrows you must carry be different. So this gives us compression by turning 1 slot into 3. So we get a +2 total slots as long as they're arrows, which is really, really good. And if you get these affinities, you even get +2 range. This, I think, is the overall stronger of the two. Like in general terms, this is the good stuff one. Ooh, something's set Pam off. I'm gonna have to pause and check what's going on. Okay, sorry about that. Our neighbour's dead got into the garden to sunbathe and made a little bit too much noise, and Pam by nature is a guard dog, so she was guarding the property. She won't listen to me when I tell them that they have every right to be in their garden. They're too close, apparently, even though they are, I don't know, like 30, 40 metres away. It's still too close for her. She might go off again. I'm just going to pause the recordings and wait for her to stop if that does happen. We'll see. Anyway, where was I? Yeah, quiver and sunstring. So yeah, it gives additional range. On top of that, there's a nice interaction between this and the Sunshark bow. The Sunshark bow usually has range of 1, meaning you have to be adjacent to the monster to attack with it. This gives additional range to the bow, and if we go back to the Sunshark bow for a moment, you'll notice it's actually a melee and ranged weapon. So this gives you an alternative playstyle with bows that I'm not going to go into here, but where you use the Sunshark bow and you combine that with the quiver, and then you use an armor set that lets you move and attack in one thing, such as Phoenix or Dragon armor, and suddenly you've got a very effective kind of short-range sniper type thing that rushes about the place or jumps in the air and lands and fires a shot. It's very evocative. There she goes. Okay, where were we? Oh yeah, so that's an alternative playstyle. It's a bit less support orientated, it's a bit more in traditional damage, but I thought I'd mention it here. In respect to the classics, some items that are helpful to consider. Monster Tooth Necklace, if you're going the strength route, this is fantastic. It helps scale your bows for longer. +2 strength on a 3 strength bow easily keeps it going for many more lantern years than it would do otherwise. Lucky Charm, classic, especially if you're going luck orientated, but you might even just use this anyway with the catgut bow, because you already have the blue affinities kicking round, so +1 luck at the cost of a slot is a very good deal. Fecal Salve, in addition to connecting to the Lucky Charm like this, is very useful if you get in a bad situation, because you can just use your activation to make yourself not a threat, get rid of the priority target token, really useful, and then you can reposition. And as I talked about in the damage dealing video, knowing when it's time to get the heck out of dodge and go somewhere else because the monster is otherwise going to get fixated on you is a big and really important and useful tool to have. Fecal Salve is really cheap and saves lives, so amazing. Stone noses, just a general kind of bit of extra protection, just a reminder. And the death mask, if you get this either randomly from the mask maker, or you manage to death blow the butcher early and get access to the mask maker location, this is incredible for the luck based playstyles. And archers, bows, that's the best place that you could ever use the death mask, because that -4 to all severe injury rolls, that's less of a concern for you than anyone else, because you, by playstyle, by distance, you're just going to suffer less severe injuries than anyone else on average. So very powerful, very, very, very strong, just kind of rare to get and only available either if you have the butcher in the campaign or you're fortunate from the mask maker. Campaign specific, just wanted to mention People of the Sun, which I will have its own video eventually. People of the Sun gives you a specific campaign bow, the Sun Ring bow. It even has the Sun Vestments that help you ignore cumbersome, which is great and increases perfect hit range, amazing. And then you get the God String, which like improves a bow further by giving it sharp and increased range 1. So this is really fun and a unique bow package. So People of the Sun is definitely something you may want to consider if you're playing as an archer. Very, very enjoyable and just a good bow. Look at this, perfect hit, do not draw hit locations, monster suffers 1 wound. That can trigger as many times as you score perfect hits. So yeah, amazing. On to fighting arts. Not too many. The first one is our classic Strategist. You can get this through a story event linked to one of the principles. Giant Stone Face is what you want. That increases your range and everything. So fantastic bonus. If we just quickly go over here, we'll see. There we are. You get +2 range and +2 accuracy while atop the Giant Stone Face. If you're playing with a lot of archery, you may even want to petition for Sculpting Strategist, because this is a huge upgrade, not just to bows but to arrows as well. Very, very strong. Last Man Standing, here for the same reason it was in the support video. You may well end up being the last person alive, not in a bad situation. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But yeah, if you're the last man or woman standing, then not gaining bleeding hungers and significantly not being knocked down is very powerful. Double Dash, this is a get out of jail free kind of card. If you get out of position, you can double move, perhaps even triple with an actual dash. So that will help you reposition very quickly. Combo Master, bows have low speed, rarely getting above 2. But this gives you on perfect hits additional attack rolls, so you know, more synergy with the Sun Ring and the Vestments, but also just a nice thing to have kicking around in your back pockets, because you often like to get additional attack rolls. Notably, perfect hits with arrows would give you additional attack rolls, which is also quite good. Unrelenting, you're more likely for all your attack rolls to result in a miss, so this gives you a re-roll on all of that for 1 survival, nice to have. Tenacious, this is just a great damage dealing support type ability, where if you fail to win something you can put it back for someone else once per round. Vengeance, same reason for Last Man Standing. You are quite often the last survivor alive, so getting these nice bonuses if things go wrong is a good thing to have. It's also nice to be able to highlight situations where what I'd say is kind of a mediocre fighting art usually has potency, because it's sort of a clutch back pocket kind of thing. You break glass in emergencies. Armor sets. Our first armor set is kind of the one you use for most of the core campaign if you don't have any expansions at all. That's Rawhide. It's cheap. It's got this Rawhide headband, which is one of the few ways we can do AI control. So we tend to wear Rawhide for a long time. We'll scale it a bit later on in the campaign as an archer by putting shields into our gear grid, and otherwise just being content. The deep pool of survival you get from this set bonus ability is really useful for an archer, because you tend to spend a lot of survival on surging and dashing in order to juggle the fact that you are handling support actions and handling attacking. So Very, very, very good armor set, and can just be the only one you run for the whole campaign. Quick side note, as we're talking about rawhide, which comes from the skinnery, the bandages, which are often used as a support item, are not great for archers because you tend to not be too close to people and you don't want to have to run up to someone when they've got too many bleed tokens. So you would ask somebody else to handle the bandages. But typically, if I am running an archer, I'll have another damage dealer with kind of some support abilities anyway to share the load of what support things are required. Right, our next one isn't so much because of synergies, but it's to do with slots. So as I mentioned before, one of the issues with archers is you need a lot of slots to fit your arrows on top of everything else. And you've only got 9 slots. Gormant armor provides you with an extra slot because it's a 4-piece armor set. And that in itself is quite interesting and useful. There's a little additional note as well, though, is it actually turns out archers, if you want to put, say, a leather shield in this spot, because that then works with the Gormant mask, admittedly you're filling up the slots more, but guard is really good for archers because it lets you move 3 spaces away after you've shot and get a free block, and you know you get survival. You guard without spending survival as long as you've got 2 green affinities in your grid. There's one, get the other one right there. Also, this ignore intimidate actions, really, really useful. Some intimidate actions cause you to like get knocked back or move away from the monster. That's especially frustrating for a bow because it's quite hard to get back in and also attack without spending survival. So that is also very, very strong. So it took me a really long time to find an area where I was like, oh, Gormant armor really works because it has low armor points. It's kind of like a bit messy, doesn't really give itself the affinity it needs, but with bows you can get there. And this is, you know, it's something I've used quite a few times with archers. I've been very satisfied with, you know, even if we're not activating the Gormant mask, that's a really tight, clean set of gear with a couple of configurations that we can pretty much like arrange these as we want. If we don't care about the screen because we're not activating it, that's even better. So Gormant armor, definitely a possibility if you have the Gorm, but not essential. That's why I wouldn't class it on the essential list. Next up, if you've got the Screaming Antelope and the Phoenix and the Lion Knight, you have Dancer armor. Dancer armor is for a similar reason to Gormant armor in that you get a free movement after your first attack. So this allows you to do the same thing of shooting then scooting. So this allows you to be mobile even if you have cumbersome on your bow, which is really good. You also get the added bonus of this, activate terrain, add +2 to your roll result, and some evasion. So this works better with a shorter range playstyle with the bow, but it is really useful for anyone except for obviously those who are sat on top of the stone face. But it's still worth noting that you can use this ability here to relocate, so it's not completely useless there. Just a really good armor set, one of the best in the game, and nice levels of protections, so very good. Finally, our last armor set, Cyclo Scale armor. So this is specifically for the short range playstyle, because if you're playing long range, you're not really taking advantage of the biggest benefit, which is attacking from the blind spot. But if you've got a bow that isn't cumbersome and you can use it to move around, and therefore be closer to the monster, this has got everything you want. It's got some evasion if things go wrong. It's got more accuracy. It's got sharp. It even lets you move through survivors. Nice extra bonus. But it has the fecal salve jammed in here as well. So I will generally say Cycloscale armor isn't really an archer's armor set, but it is a close range archer's armor set, as long as that bow is not the Sunshark bow, because the Sunshark bow already has sharp, so it doesn't benefit from this cycloid scale sleeve sharp. So that's, you know, not the best armor set for a traditional artillery style archer, but if you're playing a skirmisher style archer a bit closer on range, very strong. And that's it. that's it. So let's just surmise, shall we? Archers, very powerful. Range is one of the best things you can have in the game, and this gives you access to it. You also have a very condensed shopping list. There's only few specific things you really care about, and that means a lot of your mental space is freed up to make other decisions. On the showdown, you're relatively static as a artillery style. If you play skirmisher style, a bit more maneuverable, but both play styles are incredibly strong. Obviously, artillery style at long range is way safer. If you're sat, I don't know, like the arc bow, like 8-9 spaces away from the monster, then that's a super safe play style. And as an additional note, if you play with the arc bow and you activate its extra range, and you play with the Sunstalker quiver, and that gives you more range, you have so much range that some monsters you can just shoot into the trap and it will run at you and not actually get to hit you with the trap at all, because it can't get to you. Not every monster is like that. Some monsters just, their trap has infinite range, or they have some like cheeky ways of just getting to you immediately when you trigger the trap. But otherwise, it's something to consider. I did miss it out of the bonuses, like the positives, when I was talking about the beginning. But yeah, bows can be used to lance the trap, to negate it and get a reshuffle at very low risk, especially if used with long range. And you can get ludicrously long range if you combine arc bow, sunshark quiver, hang on, let's see if I can remember it before we look. It's the quiver and sunstring, right? Yes, quiver and sunstring. Yeah, and the giant stone face. Speaking of the giant stone face, if you unlock strategist and you plan to use an archer all campaign, you might want to get sculpture and make this the sculpture thing of choice, because it's so helpful to have a giant stone face. It is massively transformative and amazing for artillery play styles, because you can just be so free and far away from the monster. So that's really great. On the armor set front, kind of expect yourself to be the one who gets the dregs, but be happy with them. Like, this armor set is amazing for archers for a long time, a lot longer than other survivors can make use of it. But you do have other options, including crystalline skin, leyline walker, just, naked. You could be playing with, there are other survivor types that come along in the second generation that also don't wear much armor, or if any at all. But your other options include Gormant, if you want slot compression for an extra arrow, Dancer if you want to shoot and scoot, or you're playing Skirmisher, and if you're playing Skirmisher and not using the Sunshark bow, then the Cycloscale armor is pretty strong. Which means that our expansion monsters and our monsters of choice are, in rough timeline order, the White Lion, the Gorm for armor, the Flower Knight, Slenderman, the Phoenix, the Dragon King, and the Sunstalker. And hopefully I've remembered everyone. Oh, the Lion Knight for Dancer armor, unless you're house ruling that Dancer armor is just available to craft from the start, which is a valid thing that many people do. And that's it. That's this class. So going ahead, what's next? I'm going to be alternating these videos now with the series of deep dives into the monsters. So the actual next video on this channel is going to be about the White Lion and the whole process of showdown breakdown. It's going to be kind of a long one. I'm alternating them because these videos here take less time to prepare, because I've done most of the foundational work in the opening 4 videos, which gives me more mental space and time to do the work for the monster dissections, because oh boy, that is more work than anything. Taking apart a monster to its core components for analysis is a huge amount of preparation and work. So that's it. That's your archers, one of your best companions to have there out in the darkness, an incredibly powerful and flexible role that is a wonderful part of any hunt party and brings a ton of value and a unique playstyle with the incredible suite of debuffs that arrows provide. So, you can't go wrong if you're out there, and definitely if you have an archer, well, you'll be pretty safe while you're happy hunting.